AM560theanswer.com. Chicago's Morning Answer continues now on AM560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by the Money Hour radio show, Saturday afternoons at 3 on AM560, The Answer. Brought to you by Pearshell Financial Group.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And programming note, I'll be departing at the end of this hour because I have to sit in for Broadway Mike Gallagher and do his show this morning.
Doing a Broadway show? Is that why you're helping out? You're going to be there today and tomorrow.
He's always, he's always fielding offers to do, revivals of the classics, of course.
He's got a great voice. So that's today and tomorrow.
Yeah, today and tomorrow. So after Amy and Sean from Elmwood Park are done at 9, you can stay tuned, and I'll be back sitting in for Mike Gallagher. And speaking of Broadway shows, I mentioned when we were talking to Jonathan Tobin at the bottom of the last hour that the Socialist Spice Girls have now been immortalized by The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I want to hear it.
Yeah, there's the America that Heather McDonald writes about in The Hill, but then there's America West Side Story version, Simpsons style.
So many problems, tariffs. I need a distraction. They shouldn't be in America. No one but me in America. No taxes for me in America. This is my natural haircut.
Not exactly Rita Moreno.
We're more American than your wife.
She's not a big presence in my life.
Your love life makes us heave.
You two will never see Tel Aviv.
You're greasing your palm with emoluments.
It's okay with God, says Mike Pence.
Your Boris Johnson without the class. Can't wait to see you behind prison glass. Your nose is right up Putin's ass. We say it's time to impeach you fast.
Oh no, it's the Democratic candidates.
Chorus line, of course. Kick line.
Can't be the first one to lose my breath. Can't be the first one to fall. Who's an old man now?
Yeah, it's fun, and it's mostly fun at Trump's expense. It treats the Socialist Spice Girls very lightly, but that's what you'd expect from Matt Groening and the guys over at The Simpsons. Heather McDonald's America, she writes in The Hill, what the grievance brigade misunderstands about America. And this is not limited to the Socialist Spice Girls, but certainly includes them. She's talking about the crusade that's been ongoing for several years now against holidays, against statues, against American history generally. And that punctuated this week with the rollout of the New York Times' 1619 campaign that we discussed earlier. She writes this, just in summary, this piece at The Hill, in thehill.com. The saddest part of the current rage against the American past is that after the monuments have been removed, the paintings effaced, and the nationalistic words banished, nothing will have changed in the status of the self-proclaimed intersectional victims. The academic achievement gap will be intact. The greatest barriers to racial equality today are not statues and patriotic holidays. They are family breakdown and a street culture that regards academic effort and achievement as quote-unquote acting white. The time spent spray-painting statuary could be far better spent in the library acquiring knowledge and mastering skills. For more on this topic and a few others, we're pleased to be joined again by Jim Pinkerton. He's the co-chair of the Rate Coalition and a contributor to the American Conservative as well as Breitbart. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
How have you? How do you see the state of play between the grievance brigade, as Heather McDonald terms it, and President Trump in the context of this flap between the president and Tlaib and Omar, as well as some of his pronouncements about Jews who vote Democrat?
Well, it's certainly a fight, and it's kind of an odd thing where the main antagonists are the Republican president on the one hand and the Democratic members of Congress on the other, as opposed to the Democratic presidential candidates. I'm sure that every time that Trump and Ilhan Omar and AOC go at it, all the 20 or so Democrats running for president say, gee, why can't I be part of that fight? I'm the one who hopefully will be on the ballot against Trump in 2020, and AOC and Tlaib and so on won't. And so why are they getting all this airtime? It's not all that helpful to the Democrats who are actually seeking to be the next president.
It's not helpful in two ways, right? One, they're not getting airtime. Two is the Democrat Socialist Party is being branded by those four rather than one of the four that may be the nominee.
Right. It takes you back to the 1948 presidential election where the incumbent president at that time, Democrat Harry Truman, chose as a matter of tactics to run against not the Republican nominee, Dewey, but against the Republican Congress, and it was very successful for him. Truman calculated correctly that the Republicans in Congress made a better target for him than did Dewey, and so of course the Chicago Tribune thought differently, but nonetheless, as we know, Truman won that election.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about President Trump using the word disloyal? He talked about Jewish Americans should vote. And they're disloyal, meaning that they're disloyal to Israel and the Jewish people.
Yeah, it's not what I would have said, and something tells me that Trump won't be saying it again. The challenge all of us who are in the talking head business face is that if you talk a lot, the quality control tends to decay a little bit, and so there's an advantage to speaking slowly and working from a script or a teleprompter and so on. So, I think there's an issue there about the rising trend inside the Democratic Party on, the divestment issue and the BDS, as they call it. I think the president needs to be, as do we all, careful about exactly how he expresses himself.
I wanted to switch gears and tackle this column that you wrote about the Jeffrey Epstein case. I'm glad you did, because it seems now that it's starting to recede into the background even as more bizarre details emerge. And this additional story now, we've got another elite, another island, and another case of sexual abuse. Yale Medical School professor Eugene Redmond, who is found to who is doing Parkinson's research on the Caribbean island of St. Kitts, for some reason, nice gig. And over the course of many decades that he was a Yale Medical School professor, according to a 54-page report released this week by a former U.S. attorney, he sexually abused some 8 Yale undergrads or medical students, men. And so we have another curious case of, despite, by the way, allegations during the course of his tenure at Yale, never fully investigated, never a full reckoning until it looks like now. And so just what you're talking about in your piece about Epstein and perhaps cases like Eugene Redmond and the reform that is required in elitist circles.
Well, one reform that was actually instituted back in 1909 was the Mann Act by an Illinois congressman, James R. Mann, a Republican, who said that if you have a situation where women or conceivably men are being trafficked around for purposes like this and being taken advantage of, and they cross state lines, it's a federal crime. I mean, the Mann Act used to be a big deal in terms of enforcement, and it was aimed at exactly this kind of problem. And it seems like the Mann Act has kind of faded away. It was sort of laughed at by the ACLU and so on, but it's a value. It's still in the books. It's a valuable tool at preventing this. I mean, any time that you have big, rich individuals like Epstein or institutions like Yale, they had so much money there, and that they can attract and abuse innocent young people. It's a terrible thing. It's not a new phenomenon in history. It used to be called white slavery. Now you call it human trafficking. Either way, it's horrible, and it would be nice if the authorities would do a better job of enforcing the laws that have been on the books for more than a century.
Now, you also wrote a fascinating article about why buying Greenland is one of Donald Trump's best ideas. Can you explain?
Well, Greenland, it is in the North Atlantic is about 1/4 the size of the continental United States. It's more than 800,000 square miles, and right now it's mostly ice. And yet, under all that ice is enormous amounts of what they call rare earth elements and so on, which is why the Chinese have been all over Greenland trying to and succeeding in snapping up mineral rights and so on, because the natural resources that all industrial economies need for prosperity and military survival are locked away in places like that. And the environmentalists have prevented rare earth elements from being mined in the United States, and the Chinese are producing them. And now the Chinese are in the process of snapping them up in Greenland as well as elsewhere around the world, including Africa. And so as I wrote for Breitbart last week, I think the idea of getting our hands on Greenland is a tremendous idea. And whether or not we actually achieve legal ownership of it, like, say, Alaska, is less important than the ability to get at those resources.
He is Jim Pinkerton, co-chair of the Rate Coalition, contributor to the American Conservative and Breitbart. Jim, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.